25 years ago, the involvement in women's issues by traditional philanthropy was very, very small. Chicago Women in Philanthropy did a study of 1983 grants that said less than 2% of all the money coming from traditional philanthropy to women's issues.
And the fact was that women were being ignored or getting a very small piece of the pie. So we came together and decided to do some research and think about what we could do to correct this.
We looked around, we said, who's responsible for making changes here? How do we can't keep depending on the same organizations that are not being responsive. So it's up to us, it's up to women to step forward and make changes.
There were many organizations that were serving women, certainly, but how they were serving women was a big question. And I always use the example of violence against women. So at that time, people who had been battered were going in for services and were being told to go home and make peace. And people who had been raped were getting services that often said to them, "What were you wearing?" Not only was there a little bit of money going to these women's issues, that the services that were out there were just really not responsive to women's needs.
I think a lot has changed, and in my mind, not enough. But women's issues, I think, have come right up to the top of the agenda. I think there's been progress along an uneven front.
We need to celebrate. I often say that when if people come in and all we do is lament that we haven't come far enough or we haven't done enough, and we have to remember that we need to celebrate the great work and the wonderful people who have done that work over the last 25 years, over the last 5 years, and to tell them how much we appreciate them.
These 25 people are really extraordinary people by any stretch of the imagination, but we're very fortunate that we also have many other extraordinary people around, and I think it's important to recognize and to honor the leadership that we have. Gaylon Alcaraz, reproductive justice activist, organizer, champion of human rights.
The Chicago Abortion Fund was established in 1985 to provide financial assistance for poor women seeking abortion procedures. We still fund women. However, we are becoming a deeper advocate for women by making sure that they can advocate for themselves or they can take a part in this conversation.
Veronica Areola, professional feminist, mom, blogger.
I call myself a professional feminist because I run a program for women in science and engineering. So I'm advocating every day at my work for women to be interested in science and engineering as well as stay in the field. And that involves dealing with Title IX issues, sexual harassment, education equity, advancement. So I feel that in my capacity as director of the WISE program at UIC, I'm always advocating for my women students' rights and in terms of what it took for us to get to this point.
Tracy Baim, lesbian feminist publisher, editor, producer.
I was one of the co-founders of Windy City Times in 1985. I had been the managing editor of Gay Life newspaper for about a year and a half. I had worked there, and then a group of people had decided that they wanted to do their own thing, so I joined them as managing editor in Windy City Times. Well, I think it's really interesting that Chicago Foundation for Women is celebrating their 25th anniversary at the same time Windy City Times is celebrating 25 years. It's a great honor to be honored, I guess, at the same time that Windy City's turning 25, that Chicago Foundation is turning 25.
Marka Bristow, disability rights pioneer.
In the early years of my work, what inspired me were the civil rights heroes that preceded the disability rights movement. People like Gloria Steinem and Dr. King. I remember meeting Gloria for the first time, and she took my hand, raised it up in the air, and said, "We cannot go anywhere until you can go everywhere." Now I would say what inspires my work are the everyday people who, against all odds, are working together to make the world a better place for people like them.
Salome Chasnoff, documentary filmmaker, installation artist, media activist.
I'm a filmmaker and an installation artist, and my work is dedicated to expanding media access and public space for marginalized voices and stories. Media is key to any social justice enterprise because the media enable us to share our stories. And I'm also the founding executive director of Beyond Media Education. And we don't just want to be able to create media in our own voices. We want to be able to democratize the media venues and outlets that carry our messages and our stories so that we can have control over how they're mediated.
Fay Clayton, legal defender of women's rights, noted philanthropist.
The status of women motivated my practice. It was because of the problems with the status of women in the 1970s that I decided to go to law school. The Chicago Foundation for Women is, I think, one of the most important and most effective foundations for tapping the financial resources of progressive women and using the funds to advance the lot in life of women who don't have as much money as well as those who do.
Joyce Coffee, leader in domestic violence services.
Women and very often children are the most vulnerable segment of our population. Since violence is a learned behavior, that we can unlearn that behavior. And working towards that end, that homes across the city and in fact across the country would be safe, is, I just think, one of the most noble causes a person could dedicate themselves to.
Terry Cosgrove, choice activist, political organizer.
Well, my passion around reproductive rights is driven by several things. The first being that it's inconceivable to me that we as a society would deny more than half the human race the dignity and autonomy to determine where and under what circumstances they will or will not have children. I believe parenthood is the greatest responsibility anyone can undertake, and to force a woman to be a parent against her will and better judgment is just pure insanity, not to mention profoundly stupid. The only reason teens and poor women are treated so horribly is pure politics. It has nothing to do with sound public policy or good law.
Patricia Crowley, advocate for the homeless.
I began my work in the Howard area, which is the northeast corner of Rogers Park in Chicago. I helped to start a couple of shelters in Rogers Park because there weren't any at the time. I took a job at Deborah's Place. Deborah's Place was founded to focus on women who were unaccompanied by children or others, because there really wasn't any residential program that was specifically for women who were homeless and alone. The Chicago Foundation for Women is a magnificent example of collaboration across economic lines and across social lines and across geographic areas of the city.
Dr. Melissa Gilliam, physician, educator, family planning expert.
I think that family planning is important because when you look at what happens when you don't plan families, we know that some of the largest health disparities stem from unplanned and unintended children. We know that in this country we have higher rates of teen pregnancy, higher rates of abortion than in any comparably industrialized country. So it seems that if we had families that were prepared for and planned for through adequate contraception and sex education, then we'd alleviate some of the pain that is caused by unintended and undesired pregnancies.
Samir Goswami, leading voice for the elimination of sexual exploitation.
So my work is primarily focused on policy, but it's policy we define quite broadly. It's really focused on pushing for systemic change. And the issues that we work on, violence against women, obviously don't get much political traction. So not only is it we have to have good legislation backed by good research, but we actually have to have a good power base of constituents who can press for that change. Primarily, I focused on organizing women who used to be involved in prostitution and who were sex trafficked, so that they can feel empowered themselves and demand the changes that they want to see.